And so let's give you some more details. Obviously, what we've already told you is devastating, but from the late 1800s until 1996, Canada removed 150,000 Indigenous children from their homes and forced them into institutions run by church staff where they had to cut their long hair and were forbidden from speaking their language and practicing their culture. But that was only the lightest of the mistreatments. So you can get a lot of details from a lot of different places, but just some of what was inflicted upon these, again, more than 150,000 children. There were fatal fires, accidents that were frequent, and an unknown number of children escaped only to die from exposure or misadventure as they tried to make their return to distant homes. Sexual and physical violence were widespread and likely a cause of deaths, whether directly or by suicide. A National Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established back in 2008 to investigate the schools, calling the practice cultural genocide. Many children never returned home, and their families were given only vague explanations of their fates or none at all. So a van pulls up, takes a kid forcibly away from the family, strips them of their culture. Many of them die, and the family, if they ever find out about it at all, are told vaguely that there was sickness or something. So if the kid was murdered there, if the kid was sexually assaulted there, if the kid desperately tried to escape to flee back to their family and died as a result of that, likely many of those stories are just gone. The families never knew, they will never know. And by the way, 3/4 of those schools, the 130, were run by Roman Catholic missionary congregations. There was a mixture of others as well, but that was the vast majority. There's been some investigations and things like that. I want to give you one more detail though that I found in reading about this. So, and this was written by in the Guardian. It's an op-ed by Blackstock and Paul Mader, who I believe are First Nations activists. I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, but they're trying to keep the pressure on this particular issue. So they talked about the myth that the government had in Canada had spread that people back then didn't know better. So you can't get that mad about this because nobody knew what was going on. This is kind of what we hear about every historic atrocity in the US as well. Like, sure, slavery was bad, but it was a long time ago. Nobody knew. Nobody knew that it was bad, which of course erases the fact that there were people trying to stop it then. There are always people, like the Trail of Tears had opposition when it was being planned and when it was being carried out. So the same thing is happening here. And they point out that that's not true. There were people who were trying to raise public awareness decades and decades and decades before the closure of these schools. So they had a public health physician. They talked about Peter Bryce, who published The Story of a National Crime, a report detailing. So Scott is Duncan Campbell Scott. He ran the schools for a couple of decades. His stonewalling of public health measures in residential schools, where child death rates were 25% a year. Bryce had been raising the alarm since 1907. And there was accounts from kids at these facilities. So there was a letter written by a kid named Edward B. in 1923. So 73 years before the schools were closed, said that the boys in the school were so hungry that they were eating cats and wheat. His letter eventually found its way to Duncan Campbell Scott, the man I talked about who ran the schools for a couple of decades. He responded that 99% of the children in the school were too fat anyway. So if they were starving to death or eating cats they caught, hey, what are you gonna do? They need to lose weight. So there were people who do, there were people who were trying to raise the alarm about this. And for decades and decades and decades, the church did nothing, the government did nothing because they liked what was going on. They supported the cultural genocide that is talking about. Devastating, Sabrina, I know. Any other thoughts?
No, yeah, not only did they actually know better, they just didn't care. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that what they were doing was genocide. And it's because I think they did it in part because they knew that they didn't actually have a true claim to that land. So to essentially eliminate and supposedly assimilate the remaining people there, it was their goal. They knew exactly what they were doing. And it is so shameful and disgusting. And I'm looking forward to some of the solutions that they're gonna try to. And like you said earlier, we're never gonna have true justice, but I wanna see what the next best thing is.
Wow, yeah.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.